If you've ever tried making a track like Gracie Abrams, Olivia Rodrigo, Alex Warren, or even Ella Langley, you've probably noticed something. It sounds easy: guitar, vocals, maybe some live drums. But then you try it yourself and somehow it sounds smaller, and honestly just doesn't hit in the same way. For years, I thought acoustic records worked because they were simpler. But after producing acoustic-based tracks for artists, labels, TV placements, I realized the opposite was true. The best records aren't less produced. They're just produced differently. And if you listen closely to artists like Olivia Rodrigo, Gracie Abrams, and more, you'll see the same techniques showing up again and again. So today I'm going to break down 7 of those techniques and show you exactly how to use them in your own tracks. So let's dive in. Technique number 1, organic ear candy. One of the biggest mistakes I see producers make with acoustic music, they think acoustic just means minimal. But if you listen closely to a Gracie Abrams record, for example, they're actually packed with detail. But the question is, what kind of detail? Have a listen to this example. Although this really starts out as an acoustic guitar-based track, you hear small details like this. Firstly, slide guitar. And that's just using electric sunburst and really utilizing the pitch bends to imitate a slide guitar. So it's a tiny detail, but makes a massive difference and adds so much to an otherwise very raw acoustic guitar. Another element you might hear in this track are the backing vocals that are treated more like a vocal chop. This is the element in solo. It was more than likely a backing vocal on the record, but I've managed to replicate this just using some natural tones on exhale, and I think this definitely beats doing it with something like a synth, so it doesn't go too far into the electronic space. And a key element I've added here is saturation, and what we're doing is actually easing in the dry wet, so it's not distorted the whole way through. It gradually becomes more saturated as it works towards that next bar. And underneath a vocal, this can sound really nice. And automating that saturation can really add depth and movement to your track. Shoes in Texas by Ella Langley does the same thing with slide guitar. It's subtle, but it makes the whole record feel alive. Now here's the interesting part. Even after you add all of those details, most acoustic productions can still sound small and flat. Why? Because the thing making commercial records feel bigger usually isn't obvious. And a quick note before I show you what I mean, if you're trying to finish release-ready music consistently, I've put together a free training linked below. And moving on to technique number 2, hidden layering. Years ago, I was interning at a studio here in Sydney. During a mix session, my mentor told me something I've never forgotten. Even when you're mixing, never take off your production cap. And so to paraphrase Michael, the same applies here for acoustic pop. If you're producing an acoustic track, don't take off your electronic cap. Because many acoustic records you're hearing aren't just acoustic. Have a listen to this piano in solo. Now with a hidden pad and some ear candy elements underneath, this is what it sounds like. And that was Zayn and Jisoo's Eyes Closed, and of course I've replaced the main pluck with a piano, but you can still see with an acoustic instrument, it starts to feel like it's in the electronic space. And the piano didn't change, but the space around it did. So underneath that piano, we've added a subtle pad, some light plucks that carry the pulse, a bass pad for adding a modern low end, and some arpeggiated bursts. And we can try the same thing with the guitars in the Gracie Abrams example. I'm going to play you just the guitar part without the pads underneath. And then adding in a subtle pad that sounds like this. And for this, we're using a preset inside of PopLab. This is what it sounds like in solo. And for a bit of extra movement, we're gradually panning from left to right. And again, you barely hear these layers, but take them away and the whole record feels smaller. And honestly, the easiest hidden layer to forget in an acoustic track is of course bass. We've got something live as the core element, and for this last chorus, a Reese pad underneath it to make this section a touch more expansive. Most of the emotional weight is really happening in that area. But even if you've got the right layers, acoustic records can still sound muddy. And that's where the next technique comes in. Technique number 3, dynamic EQ and ducking. So now we've got detail and we've got hidden layers, but acoustic productions can still end up feeling crowded. And the reason is simple. Unlike a lot of electronic music, acoustic records often have multiple important elements fighting for attention at the same time. The guitar, the piano, drums, vocal, everything sort of wants to be the star. One thing I love to use is dynamic EQ and volume ducking to create space automatically. For example, if we want an acoustic kick to really cut through the mix, I'll use dynamic EQ on the bass and other instruments to duck that frequency out when the kick hits. So here's the kick and bass without the dynamic EQ. You can really hear a bit of that rattle on the frequencies they're clashing on. Now here it is adding the dynamic EQ onto the bass. We've hooked it up to the kick in the sidechain using Pro Q3. So you might need some headphones to hear that one, but it's a really effective technique. Another thing I really like to do is simply volume ducking. It's much simpler than dynamic EQ, and all you need is a utility plugin. So for this one, I noticed that the snare just required a bit more space and was kind of clashing a bit with the instrumental. So what I've done is automate these tiny dips using the gain knob, and they only occur on every snare hit. And you can go as extreme or as subtle as you like here. I've chosen to go a little more subtle so you don't hear as much of a dip in volume. So if we take out the snare so you can hear exactly what it's doing, this is what it sounds like. So it's pretty drastic in solo, but you can hear just how much space it's creating for the snare. But clarity isn't the biggest thing separating amateur productions from professional ones. The biggest difference is the identity of the track, and I learned that completely by accident. Technique number 4, the core hook. A few years back, I was contacted by an A&R at Sony Music to make an acoustic arrangement of a track I'd released with them earlier that year. The track was being used in a home and away trailer for one of the final seasons. Funny thing was, they originally talked about hiring another session guitarist to play the guitar part. And I remember saying to my manager, all good, I'm a guitarist as well, I'll take care of it. The problem, I had only a week to turn the whole thing around. And as always, that was on top of a bunch of other things I had to do that week. So instead, I built pretty much all of the guitar part inside of Kontakt. And that one guitar part ended up carrying the entire arrangement. It had rhythm, harmony, even a subtle melodic element. You can actually hear it on the Selected Works playlist over on my channel. Of course, I can't play it here because I usually don't like getting copyright flagged. But once I started analyzing records like Ordinary by Alex Warren, I realized the same thing was happening everywhere. The plucked guitar in that track, for example, isn't just accompaniment. It's carrying the identity of the song and everything else can be built around it. Here's the example in Alex Warren's Ordinary. That's what I call the core hook. One element doing multiple jobs. You can hear it in Gracie Abrams records too. The opening guitar isn't just there to support the vocal. It's the core element of the production and the whole groove is built around it. And honestly, this is one of the first things I help my coaching clients with because most unfinished tracks don't have a mixing problem, they have more of an identity problem. And if your tracks start with a strong, addictive core idea, it can carry the rest of the mix, arrangement, and melody. So if you're struggling to finish songs consistently, book a free strategy call below and we'll figure out exactly what's holding your music back. But before we move on, try this. If your core hook happens to be on guitar, take that and double it an octave higher. I've done it in just about every example here and it makes a big difference. Check it out. much bigger, and no added clutter. Now, once you've got a strong identity, the next challenge is making the productions hit as hard as commercial records. Technique number 5, modern acoustic drums. One thing I noticed when analyzing some of these records is that the drums almost never sound completely natural. They are natural, but enhanced. And there are usually 2 reasons. 1, sound selection, and 2, layering. In Gracie Abrams' track, here's the live kit solo. Now with some acoustic style layers like a verbed out tambourine and an analog machine clap just for a bit of top end bite, this is what it sounds like. Same groove, but just more impact. What's happening here is that the live drums are still the foundation, but extra lightweight percussion is being used to enhance it. And these layers add brightness, width, and movement without changing the identity of the performance, because they sit above and around the kit rather than replacing it. And for this kind of thing, using live drums as the core, I've been using modern live drums by PopLab. They've actually kindly sponsored this video. They sent me this drum kit recently to try out, and for all of that modern acoustic stuff, it just works really nicely, and there are some really fantastic sounds in here. And the cool thing is, they're all based on modern tracks that use acoustic drums. So as you can see, they're named after different artists, which is really, really cool. I'll leave a link down below if you want to check it out. But what's interesting is that even after adding these acoustic style layers, modern records often still go one step further, because there's usually something happening underneath the instrumental that you don't immediately notice. If we have a look at Olivia Rodrigo's Trader, like many acoustic tracks in a similar vein, they're using very subtle acoustic sounding elements that really act like an underlying pulse for the track. Here's a quick example. They're very roomy and muted out, but the purpose is really to create this kind of transparent, hollow sound that just acts as an underlying pulse in the backdrop. But this is where things really start to shift, and many modern acoustic records aren't choosing between electronic and acoustic. They're starting to combine both, which brings us to technique number 6, hybrid layering. At this point, we need to take this a step further, because modern records aren't just enhancing live drums anymore. They're often doing the opposite. Instead of starting with a live kit and adding electronic elements, they start with an electronic foundation. Here's the groove of Alex Warren's Ordinary built in a more electronic form. Now with the organic layers placed on top, same drums, but way bigger with these elements. We've added a tambourine underneath the kick, toms on top of that, and a live snare. Nothing's really overdone on this record, but it feels acoustic and extremely modern at the same time by having the electronic elements in place as the core foundation and then the organic elements on top of that. And this is why some electronic tracks lean more electronic while others lean more acoustic. It depends on whether the core foundation are acoustic drums or more electronic sample-based. And the truth is, these artists aren't treating acoustic and more electronic production as opposites. They're treating each as tools that they can use. Because with even all of this, the track can still feel static. Technique number 7, dynamics and reverse transitions. The last thing modern acoustic records do really well is movement. Even when the arrangement's simple, it never feels stuck in one place. For example, halfway through this lead guitar phrase, you'll hear that accompanying guitar slowly rise in volume. It just has that small moment to shine after that lead phrase. And small changes in energy and intensity can really move the track forward. It's not dramatic, but it stops the track from feeling static. You'll see we've done the same with some of the organic elements too. For example, fading in some of the notes of the slide guitar so we ease into the phrase rather than a sort of static note hit. This is what it sounds like. And then it sinks in volume again to leave space for other elements. And then of course, there's a slightly more extended version of this idea, and that is reverse transitions. And this is a really simple one, but if you have an acoustic track that's just a very basic arrangement, say guitar, piano, and maybe you haven't added too much else yet, something like reverse transitions can do so much to pull you in from phrase to phrase. Here's an example reversing the last chord of the piano. And in solo, again, a really subtle move, but you can do this with guitars, vocals, pianos, anything like that, and you'll be surprised what it can add to your track. So most modern acoustic records are acoustic at the source, but the mindset behind them is still deeply production, electronic-led, maybe even when everything sounds organic. And none of this really works without a strong arrangement, because layering, sound design, and transitions don't fix a weak track. So if you want to take this further, watch this video on arrangement. That's where it all comes together.